Hey there, today we're going super unproduced to ask a simple question. It may strike you as an outrageous one, but bear with me and I think you'll get the point and you may even agree with me. The question is the United States Islam's best friend? Now, considering recent history, this question can seem outrageous. Over the past 2 decades, the United States has embarked on an unprecedented war against Islamic countries. Basically, the goal has been to cover up the fact that one of our biggest purchasers of arms carried out a massive attack on the United States. Talking about Saudi Arabia, of course. So, really, over the past 20 years, the United States has most famously invaded Iraq, but we've also tried to bring out regime change in Syria. We're facilitating the murder of what looks like over 250,000 people in Yemen. And just generally, we have acted in a pretty horrific fashion, killed, depending on how you measure it, somewhere between hundreds of thousands and millions of Muslims through pretty savage attacks on countries, some of which did stuff to us, most of which did not. Even worse than this, there have been elements within the U.S. government and without it that have worked really hard to stoke an incredible fear and bigotry against Islam, against Muslims, and against an entire world religion. It's been pretty horrifying, and it may seem ridiculous that I could even ask the question whether or not the United States is Islam's best friend. There are many people in the comments who maybe whether they're from the Muslim world or from without it, who really look forward to this idea that the United States will fall, whether we bankrupt ourselves with a war in Iran or tear ourselves apart through some quest for an imagined white ethno-state that never existed. People are excited by this prospect. They're looking forward to the fall of the United States because they think it might be good for Islam. But I think if you think it through, you realize that that's not really the case at all. Who do you think actually will be running the world in a post-American system? Who's going to be in charge? Who's going to be the most powerful once the United States has shuffled off the stage? Well, the simple answer to that is twofold, and maybe just onefold, but for the sake of argument, let's say we're going to deal with a world where the powerful elements, post the United States, are going to be China and India. These two massive countries, these two massive civilization states, are going to be the folks who are the most important. They're going to be the folks who are the most important by the end of the century regardless, unless, things go terribly wrong in either of those countries. But those are the folks who would take over if the United States faded away. And this year, we're getting a clearer and clearer idea of what a world run by China or India would mean for Muslims and what it would mean for Islam. I don't have to tell viewers of this channel about the horror that is occurring in Xinjiang province in China. I've already done a video on that. I'll link it at the end of the video, but to put it briefly, it's basically at least 1 million adherents of the Muslim faith put into camps and forced to act against their religion. It's not yet something that can be described as genocidal. It doesn't appear that the Uyghurs are being killed by the Chinese in large numbers, but it can absolutely be described as an act of cultural genocide. Mosques are being torn down. People are being punished for acting in adherence to the Muslim faith. This is an atrocity. This is how China treats Muslims. That's not much to look forward to. Now, with India, it's a much more ambivalent situation. India is actually one of the largest Muslim countries in the world. I'm sure I can already see the angry comments, but what I mean when I say that is that there are over 170 million Muslim citizens of India. And they've obviously had an incredibly fraught history. It's been uncomfortable at numerous times. I was reading a lot today about one time in particular that was tremendously uncomfortable for Indian Muslims, and that was 2002 and the Gujarat riots. Now, these are tremendously contentious conversations about that historical event, but what is clear is that at least 1,000, and somewhere some say as many as 2,000 people died in these riots. Both Muslims and Hindu Indians, both Muslim and Hindu Indians died in these riots, but it's been characterized by many as an anti-Muslim pogrom. Or pogrom. I'm not even sure how to pronounce that, but it's been described as a series of anti-Muslim riots. Muslim businesses were destroyed. Muslim women were murdered and raped. The extent to which this was a two-sided thing is hotly contentious, but most agree that it was violence pointed towards Muslims, primarily. Once again, the degree to which the government was involved in this is contentious. We don't know. There's many who argue that the government helped to incite this. The government of Gujarat at the time helped to incite this, that it was easier on Hindus that were arrested than they were on Muslims, and sort of stepped back as atrocities were committed against Muslims. Now, India has a very fraught history, and there's definitely a deep history of violence on both sides, and I don't want to try to, make the Gujarat riots to be, indicative of Indians in general, or to try and blame everyone for this really horrific event that happened back in 2002. The problem is that the Indians have chosen to make this somewhat indicative of what modern India is about, because the first minister of Gujarat, I think I got that right, the guy in charge from 2001, so not immediately before, but the guy who'd been in charge of Gujarat for a year before 2001, before 2002 riots, was Narendra Modi. Now, Narendra Modi is better known in the West for his neoliberal policies. That's something that I enjoy. He was renowned for doing a good job economically in Gujarat, but he's also well known as a guy who could very well, I'm not going to say for sure, it's really tremendously contentious, but he was the guy in charge of Gujarat when the Gujarat riots happened. He's been cleared sometimes, by some courts. He's been exonerated a couple times, but then exonerated with questions. Then people have questions about how those investigations went. And so, I don't want to, but the fact is, this guy was in charge when these riots happened, and he should have, not had much of a career after that. Any dignified politician would probably have resigned. He's the Prime Minister of India. He was elected in 2014, and at that point, the emphasis was on his economic record. And while, his Hindu nationalism, his pronounced Hindu nationalism was always a part of his appeal, it was something that he dialed back on for the 2014 elections. That was not the case in the 2019 elections. His pitch, his campaign, involved bombing Pakistan. Which was, yes, in response to a terrorist action that Pakistan may or may not have had responsibility for, but it was an escalation, and it was pretty transparently a ploy to use not Indian nationalism, but Hindu nationalism to attain power. So this is a guy who may or may not have been responsible for a massacre of Muslim citizens, clearly is happy to use the very dangerous tool of Hindu nationalism. Hindu nationalism that sort of constitutes itself as being not just anti the Muslims of Pakistan, but anti the Muslims of India, the Indian citizens. It's of course nowhere near on the same scale as China, but India doesn't really present much of a positive the prospect of India running the world or having a greater say in world affairs doesn't exactly present a positive prospect for Muslim countries either, or for Muslim people, in India least of all. So at this point, I think I can imagine many of my commenters who are looking forward to the end of U.S. power saying to themselves, well, Yeah, I mean that's really too bad, or even horrible for the Muslims of China or India. But really, at the end of the day, we would at least have something done about Israel, because really it's just the United States that keeps Israel going. And sure, maybe a world run by China and India wouldn't be so great for Muslims in the aggregate, but at least it would do something for the Palestinians, right? Well, no, I'm afraid that's not true either. Israel is a country that works very, very hard to make powerful friends. Today, all they really need is the United States, but that doesn't mean they're just sitting back and relaxing in the sort of basking in the glow of U.S. approval. They are working very, very hard and have been working for decades to cultivate both China and India. Both China and India are working very, very hard to improve, to build up their militaries. And one of the largest players, vastly disproportional to their small size, in the military revolutions in both China and India is Israel. Even as small as it is, Israel is the second largest provider of military services to both China and India. Now, keep in mind, I got those figures off of Wikipedia. Like I said, this is an unproduced video. I haven't tracked down everything, but I see no reason to doubt those figures. Israel is in a very small way that actually translates to very big ways, a military superpower. They develop equipment, they innovate, they provide services, they probably provide, who knows, they probably provide some intelligence cooperation with China and India. I'm not even saying that's sinister in some way. I'm not talking about trading confidential information. They just probably are helping them develop resources, all manner of resources. Israel has figured out how to become tremendously valuable to both China and India. Unfortunately, most of the rest of the Middle Eastern countries aren't providing much more other than, solidarity or the opportunity to loan a lot of money to build ports and stuff. Israel will be just as favored in a post-American world as it is in the American one today. And who do you think is going to do a better job defending the rights of the Palestinians? Some sort of two-faced but maybe conceivably well-intentioned Americans? Or is it going to be the Chinese with their experience in Xinjiang? Or the Indians with their experience from Gujarat? It's kind of horrifying to contemplate, but if you think about it seriously, the United States is Islam's best friend. The prospect of a fall of the United States will not improve the prospects of the Palestinians, and it will not improve the prospects of Muslims anywhere. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and click on the little bell next to the subscribe button if you want to get updates whenever I upload a video. I promise they're usually much more produced than this. Thanks.